Few things are more tragic than a missing persons report remaining unsolved. Families can be left with questions that may not be answered for years, decades, or ever. Such was the case in 1980 when the remains of a John and Jane Doe were discovered in the woods in Harris County, Texas. For over 40 years, the identities of the bodies remained a mystery. DNA evidence recently solved one mystery, only to open up several new ones, some of which remain unsolved to this day. So, today, we're telling you everything we know about the bizarre disappearance of Dean and Tina Klaus. But before we put on our investigating hats, make sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, follow the clues down to the comments and let us know what other unsolved mysteries you want to hear about next. Alright, search parties, let's get searching. In 1978, talented cabinet maker Harold Dean Klaus Jr. met Tina Gail Lynn through their older siblings, who were already dating each other, which is a classic younger sibling move. The young pair started a romance of their own after discovering many shared interests, eventually marrying in June 1979 in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. Then the couple was excited to discover they were pregnant and expecting a child in the new year. Baby Holly was born in January of 1980 and was promptly doted on by her loving parents, aunts, uncles, and grandparents. However, shortly thereafter, Dean landed a job building homes during the early 80s construction boom and packed his wife, young daughter, and all their belongings into his 1978 two-door red burgundy AMC Concorde to make the trek to Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas, and start their new life. Unfortunately, the Lone Star State had a different, deadly fate in mind for them. Dean and Tina, who would have a celebrity name like Dina or Teen, moved in with Dean's cousin in Louisville for the first stint of their Texas life before eventually getting their own place. Letters home to family in Florida were steady throughout the last quarter of 1980, with the Klauses filling their loved ones in on their Texas adventures, job opportunities, and, of course, updates and photos of baby Holly. Nowadays, cell phones and social media make it relatively easy to stay in touch with loved ones, but back then it was either snail mail or a landline, and you can't send photos through a 1980s phone. According to Tina's sister, they were only in their new digs for 2, maybe 3 weeks before they seemed to vanish. Tina had sent out a letter just before Christmas 1980, which wound up being the last letter ever sent from the Klaus family. After that, all 3 members of the Klaus family unceremoniously disappeared. While the circumstances of the young family's disappearance were a mystery, it wasn't necessarily unexpected, thanks to the religious beliefs sometimes demonstrated by Dean Klaus and the religious group the Christ family. When he was a young adult, Dean could often be found hanging out with white robe-clad individuals his family would derisively refer to as Jesus freaks. These individuals, the bluntly named Christ family, were a group founded by Charles Franklin McHugh, who went by the blunt nickname Lightning Amen. Lightning Amen and his flock believed in nonviolence, detested materialism, and practiced sexual abstinence. In a time of more extreme fringe groups grabbing headlines like Jim Jones's People's Temple, which had collapsed into murder and mass suicide 2 years earlier, the Christ family seemed comparatively mild. Dean and Tina are believed to have joined the group shortly after arriving in Texas, and went as far as following them to their camp about 40 miles from Yuma, Arizona. It is unknown how the family arrived in Arizona or why they left and returned to Texas, but it is believed that at some point they diverged from the Christ family group.
Hey there, weird historians! The richest man in ancient Babylon started out as a scribe on clay tablets. He began his journey to wealth by taking a few small steps at a time. You may not be a Babylonian scribe, but maybe you're thinking about a career change to the high-paying world of tech, and you aren't sure where to begin. The good news is you don't need to spend years studying to take those first small steps. All you need is Triple 10. Triple 10 is an online education platform that offers tech boot camps with the highest graduation and employment rates in the industry, regardless of your background or level or experience. And they're flexible. allowing you to learn around your schedule from anywhere in the world, teaching the most in-demand specialties in 5 to 9 months. And because there's no better teacher than experience, Triple 10 gives their students projects with real companies to gain real work experience, with 87% of graduates getting hired at major companies like Amazon, Apple, Google Play, and Spotify, earning salaries as high as $120,000 after 3 years. If you don't get a job within 6 months, they will refund your money back. So don't wait to join over 1,000 graduates in making a change. Follow the link in the description to receive a free career consultation. And now, back to the video.
Both Dean and Tina's families attempted to report them missing, but that's where the story gets even stranger. Due to the belief that the family joined a religious cult, the police theorized that Dean, Tina, and baby Holly were just living their lives as nomads, drifting from place to place, and didn't take the reports seriously. This was seemingly confirmed when, a few weeks after the Klaus letters stopped arriving home in Florida, a mysterious woman reached out to the Klauses about buying Dean's AMC Concorde back. According to the caller, referred to only as Sister Susan, Dean and Tina had joined the Christ family group and were giving up all their worldly possessions and cutting ties to their families. She insisted that everything was absolutely fine and that no follow-ups would be needed or in fact tolerated. For obvious reasons, this explanation aroused some suspicion. Weeks after this bizarre incident, a man on a walk in the woods of Harris County, Texas, was shocked when his German Shepherd emerged from the thick of the forest with a decomposing arm in its mouth. The sheriff's department was called to the scene, where the bodies of an unidentified man and woman were found, with the skeletal remains showing signs of foul play. The bodies, known only then as the Harris County Jane and John Doe, would go unidentified for 40 years. Due to little evidence being left at the scene, the bodies of John and Jane Doe were buried in anonymous graves and became another part of the unsolved case backlog. Then in 2011, the bodies were exhumed to extract DNA, which would eventually open the door to discovering who these Does were and what they were doing the day they both died. For 10 years, that genetic information sat in a database until forensic genealogist Misty Gillis found a hit on a missing persons case. With the help of forensic genetic genealogist Allison Peacock, a team of scientists was able to not only positively ID Dean and Tina Klaus, but also find their next of kin over the next few months. Once they tracked down the family, they explained what they knew. Dean and Tina had been slain sometime between October and December of 1980, with Dean bound, gagged, and bludgeoned, and Tina strangled. While the details were heartbreaking and tragic, the family finally had some closure. Except, once the gruesome details were sorted out, Dean Klaus's sister raised a very important question. What happened to baby Holly? The identification of the Klauses kicked off an investigation as to what may have happened to baby Holly. Baby Holly would have been just a shade under 1 year old when her parents were slain, but her whereabouts were not found anywhere near the crime scene. Eventually, the investigation led to a Seventh-day Adventist church in Yuma, Arizona, and its pastor, Philip McGoldrick. According to McGoldrick, one day in November 1980, 3 women clad in white robes approached his church with a baby girl and told him that due to their church's nomadic lifestyle, they couldn't raise the child. The trio, one of whom McGoldrick believed could have been Tina, handed the baby to the pastor alongside a paper relinquishing all rights, and were never seen again. McGoldrick, borrowing a decision from the story of baby Moses floating down the River Nile, decided to raise the baby as his own in the church. He eventually disclosed that she was not his biological child, but that he had no idea what had become of Holly's birth parents. Neither of them had any way of knowing the grim circumstances behind her adoption. In an ironic but happy twist of fate, young Holly ended up living her life with a loving family, completely oblivious to the fact that there was a nationwide search for her whereabouts. By 2022, the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit were actively trying to figure out what happened to the Klaus's baby girl. I mean, she was under 1. It's not like she could have walked very far. Finally, the aforementioned adoption certificate for baby Holly was the last piece of the puzzle investigators needed to finally uncover where she had been all this time. After a court order securing the certificate from Florida, this adoption certificate put investigators in contact with Philip McGoldrick, his wife Constance, and eventually his adopted daughter Holly. McGoldrick and Holly were living in Oklahoma at the time, so a reunion over Zoom was set up, and Holly got to meet her biological family for the first time in 40 years. Holly became close with Dean's mother Donna and feels blessed not only that she was spared the same fate as her birth parents, but that she was able to reunite with the rest of her family after so many years. Plus, a 40-year backlog of birthday presents from your grandparents ain't too shabby either. It's the least they could do. Unfortunately, whoever was behind the tragic fates of Dean and Tina is still unknown, and presumably still walks free, although the likelihood of that dwindles with each passing year. While Philip McGoldrick was briefly considered a suspect, he was cleared of any wrongdoing and just happened to be in the right place at the right time when Holly was given up for adoption. Sergeant Rachel Kading, an investigator with the Texas Attorney General's Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit, had also interviewed somewhere around 50 current and former members of the Christ Family religious group in the hopes of finding some information about what happened to Dean and Tina. But so far, their involvement with the group seems to be unrelated, and Kading feels confident that no evidence points to the church being involved in the couple's deaths. The prevailing theory is that the Klauses were hitchhiking and accepted a ride from the wrong person. The case seems to have run cold after 40 years. However, until very recently, it seemed impossible that baby Holly would ever turn up again. So even though this bizarre case may be cold, it's far from closed. So what do you think? Will this case ever be completely solved? Let us know in the comments, and while you're there, check out some of these other videos from Our Weird History.